You ever feel like you just can't remember the code you just learned? Like you keep Googling the same thing over and over again? Well, let me tell you, you're not alone. So today I'm gonna explain why this happens and also give you some practical tips to help you be more confident as a developer or software engineer and help you start retaining these concepts and being able to use them in the future. Let's go ahead and dive in. So if you're new, my name's Zazo. I've been coding for over 10 years and I've been in the tech industry for about 8 years. I've held different roles from software engineer to a data engineer and a lot of other things in between. I have a little bit of expertise when it comes to forgetting code and struggling to retain code as well. So the first thing is understanding why you forget code. Let me be clear about this. Everybody forgets code at a certain point. So it's completely normal. So don't beat yourself too much up about this, especially when you're starting out as a beginner. This is a relatively difficult concept or thing to actually learn, so forgetting is completely normal. So programming is less about memorizing code and it's more about understanding concepts and how to use them to solve problems. But here's the thing, you need a good foundation to reduce your time Googling. Not that Googling in general is bad. So some reasons why you may be forgetting code is you haven't practiced enough, so you don't have enough repetition of doing these things or writing certain code statements or loops or functions or whatever the concept that you are struggling to retain. You probably haven't done it enough, which is probably why you are forgetting. Another thing, and I've done this as well, is you're trying to memorize the code kind of line by line instead of the code in real world scenario or applying it to an actual problem that needs to be solved. This is very easy to do considering in school you can get away with this by, basically memorizing some concepts or some verbiage or whatever you're in school for and being able to regurgitate it on a test. So this is very normal to kind of get in that mind state. It does not work for programming and code. So that's another reason why you might be forgetting. Another thing is you might not have really understood the why behind the code that you're writing or trying to memorize or anything like that. And that is very important because that really helps cement the concepts in your mind. So that's another reason why you might be forgetting how code works or forgetting how to actually code or what the code is. So I'm going to give you a real quick kind of insight is that even the most senior engineers Google things. So you're not alone there, and everybody forgets syntax here and there and how to write certain things. So don't feel like you're alone in this, but the difference is that these seniors do know how to solve problems with code and they do understand the logic behind the tools that you're using or they're using. So stick around. Like I said, I'm gonna give you some practical tips on how you can get better at actually understanding these concepts and understanding the why behind the things that you are using. Before I get into that, I'm gonna kind of give you essentially some no-nos that you don't want to do when you're learning the code or when you're trying to memorize code or if you're forgetting code. So like I stated before, do not try to memorize your code line by line. It's not actually going to help you solve real problems. Just because you wrote an if statement or a function here will not apply to every problem. The syntax and the way that it's written, the structure will not apply to every problem. So that right there, it's not sustainable for you to try to memorize things here and there. It's going to take up too much of your brain power. You really need to focus on the foundational understanding of why and what these concepts do. So don't skip the fundamentals. Data structures and algorithms are a good thing to kind of learn, as well as key concepts like for loops, if statements, functions, and those type of things. You really want those to be cemented because you will use those on a day-to-day basis once you are coding. And obviously the other foundational things as well, like I said, data structures, knowing those, knowing how they work, knowing how to manipulate them and how to work with them. So focus on those key concepts and less about what it looks like or how it should look and trying to memorize it, because if you understand the concept, whether you go from, Python to Java to C#, you're going to know the concept And the only thing that really changes is the syntax. So by you trying to memorize syntax, that will kind of limit your learning to only like one language, if you're even able to remember all the syntax exactly every single time. So another thing is, I know that we're in the age of AI. Try to not rely too heavily on AI, because that is another thing that can really damage you, especially if you're copy and pasting code. You'll get too used to essentially looking at something and just copying it down, instead of learning the actual reasons of the why behind the code itself. It's the essential to going through class and you just keep copying your friend's paper or, answers. You'll think that you're getting the good grade. You'll get a false sense of confidence by copying, because you're going to be getting those good grades. However, what happens when your friend, you guys don't have the same class anymore, right? And you're not able to copy their work anymore, and you have to do it on your own. And then what happens? You're going down in an earlier round. So just remember, don't rely on AI too much. You can use it, but always use it in a strategic way to kind of understand the concepts better, rather than just copying and pasting. So now we're going to get into the practical tips for retaining code, or retaining these code concepts. Let's go. So the first thing is, you can essentially learn by writing code in what's called pseudocode. And that's essentially, it's not really a syntax thing. It's more of plain English and kind of not planning out, but writing your thoughts and worrying less about the syntax itself, and being able to kind of solidify the concepts. You're kind of tricking your brain into writing plain English, so you're not worried about memorizing, right? Because English, you already know it. And you are really focusing on solving the problem and using these concepts like loops and if statements and things like that to solve your problem. And your brain's not going to try to memorize English because it knows English clearly. And you'll essentially start to kind of pick up the reason why you're using whatever tool or whatever little concept that you're trying to do. So try to write pseudocode, try to write code and understand the reason why behind it. Another thing is going to be build real world projects. Before you go and say, well, I can't build an app, I can't build all of this. No one is telling you that you have to write the next IG, Facebook, DeepSeek, I think that's what it's called. But no one's telling you that you have to write all these fancy applications in order to just learn. You can start small, and that's as small as you want to make it. If it's just something text-based where you take input and you just concatenate that to a sentence like hello John or hello John Doe, just something like that. But you want to be doing it from scratch, and you don't want to be always following along with tutorials and copying them, case by case and word for word. You want to do stuff on your own. It will force you to kind of, essentially solve problems, real world problems. They may be small problems and problems that you made up in your own head, but this also helps cement those concepts in your mind. Even something as small as a to-do list, having to check each element in the list and seeing if it has been done or not. And this could be text-based at first. Don't make a GUI. Don't make a interface for it. Just keep everything text-based and really start to gain the concepts. Don't get too hung up on the details of making things look good and all of that. Just get to, I don't understand what a loop is. So what is a practical way that I can use a loop in a real world scenario to really cement what this is in my mind, and build something like to-do list and go through each element, check whether it's completed or not. Something simple like that, but you have to do it from scratch and you have to start small, because big tasks can seem very daunting. So start small, build real world projects. All right. The next thing is, debugging is by far one of the best ways for you to learn these concepts and to retain and remember code. Because when you fail and when you struggle, it's something you don't want to do again. So therefore, you tend to remember these things like 10x. Like if there was a line of code that you wrote and it was literally just a semicolon that you were missing, or something very small syntax that you missed, I bet at least for the next week or two while you're writing code, you will make sure that you have every semicolon in place. Even if you're getting an error and you validated that semicolons are in place, you'll probably be looking for a semicolon that's not even out of place. That's not even the error, but you're still gonna look for it because the struggle that you went through from finding that, even though it was so small, is something that kind of sticks in your brain. So as uncomfortable as it is, debugging and running into errors and struggling and solving them is rewarding. It is uncomfortable. However, it is definitely worth it. Can you find solutions online? Yes. However, I would caution you on just finding the solution and solving the problem. You have to understand why the solution is a solution to your specific problem. So that's where I say hold off. If you're a beginner, hold off on just copy and pasting and just being like, okay, fixed, move on, and really understand why that is wrong and experiment around that, right? If you're getting some type of type error, right, for some reason you're expecting an int and you put in a string, right? Try to see what happens if you put a float, or what happens if you put a Boolean value. You get the same error. Does it look different? You know, what's going on there? Kind of do little experiments and try to figure that out. That's going to be a far better lesson for you in your learning. All right, so another thing is actually very vital, and this is kind of something that I'm using as well here in this video. So teach what you learn. So explaining concepts to someone else or even yourself will help like solidify your knowledge. So one of the big reasons why I started posting YouTube videos was for this reason exactly, to help myself learn as well. But what you can do if you have a camera and you want to do that, or on your phone or whatever, or you have somebody that you can explain it to, preferably probably somebody that's not tech related, because this also builds other skills. But if you have somebody, whoever may be a friend, try to explain it to them. And if they genuinely get what you're saying, that means that you are getting better at explaining. You're getting better at, solidifying the concepts. And if after you tell them, hey, this is what I learned, let me know if this makes sense, and you tell them and they're like, bro, I don't know what you're talking about, I have no idea, then yes, that's not the best, but you have some work to do, right? How do I get better at explaining this? Because explaining these concepts are going to be very vital to them sticking in your mind, because you're having to break them down in the most simplest form in order to explain them, which means you need a deep understanding of the why and how they work. So another thing is start grouping concepts together. So what I mean by this is, if you are learning about data structures, right, then you probably want to learn about algorithms. Why? Because with data structures, with algorithms, you can manipulate data structures. And by learning them together, you don't just learn what a data structure is, something like an array, where you could put multiple elements or whatever it may be in a vacuum, is that will only get you so far, because if you can't do anything with it, then it's just an array. It doesn't seem as important, or you can't relate it to a real world problem. But if you kind of couple that with something like a for loop and how to iterate through and do certain things within that array, now you understand how this could be a real world type of problem and how you would be able to solve something with a for loop and an array, right? If going back to the to-do list, if you want to build a to-do list, you put all your items in the array and you loop through and check for certain things. That is a real world scenario, and you may have to do that in other applications. The concept still applies, but it may go from being a to-do list and it can go to something else, something like a social media website. Maybe you want to check if this person has read this post, right? You want to loop through, different posts and see if this person has looked at this post. The concept transfers even though the apps are different. So really group those concepts together and try to make them relatable to each other, and it will stick better as well. So remember that programming isn't about memorizing. It's all about problem solving. Coding and programming, they're just about solving problems and using code as tools. So essentially, the more you practice, the more familiar you are going to get with the syntax and logic and concepts, and it's really going to stick in your brain. But guess what? Even if you forget, that's okay. Every programmer, from beginner to senior to staff engineer to all of them, forget stuff at some point. So Googling isn't bad and forgetting isn't bad, but you want to be able to make sure that you are understanding the concepts and not just trying to memorize code. So this is it for this video. Go ahead and like, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Love, peace, and chicken grease. I'm out. I'll see you on the next one.